They say that when you tell a story, any story, you should not start with what the weather was like. I agree completely, and in other circumstances I would not start a story like that. But if I'm being honest with myself, the weather from that night was the thing that I keep coming back to, that I remember the most. It was that relentless rain, heavy, and the kind that saturates you right through. It seeps into your bones like guilt. I was in Liverpool on that wet, cold and rainy night, a Saturday, waiting at Central Station, one of the main train stations in the city centre. The flotsam and jetsam were passing me by. It was dark, and the Saturday shoppers were on their way home, while the early bird clubbers and drinkers hadn't descended yet. Another hour or so, and the place would be filled with students, workmen, party-goers, all looking for a good time and cheap booze. But for now, it was relatively quiet, a sort of social no-man's land. I had been standing in place for nearly half an hour, pretending to check my phone and my watch to keep my cover in place. I looked like anybody else in the vicinity. Jeans, heavy boots, and an anorak with a hood that held my long, greasy hair in place. Welcome to the glamour of the undercover operative, ladies and gentlemen. There wasn't a vodka martini in sight. As a source handler for the British Security Service, more inaccurately known as MI5 these days, by the press and ill-informed thriller writers, I was doing what I was paid to do, and what I was good at. I was here to meet, covertly, one of my stable of CHISs. And what is a CHIS, I hear you ask? Well, CHIS is an acronym for Covert Human Intelligence Source, which translates as a spy, a tout, an informer. I'm the handler. CHIS is the spy. He passes me information. I pay him, or her, either in cash, or, as is normally the case, I keep them out of prison. Source Osman was Seamus McIver, a lorry driver from Belfast, who had been caught 18 months ago smuggling in weed. A quick trip to the prison cell had left him ripe for recruitment by some unscrupulous intelligence officer, namely me. All he had to do was ingratiate himself with some of the people he had grown up with on the Shankill estate. Despite the peace process, the extremists still hadn't completely disappeared, even after all these years later. And there was still a retinue of loyalist killers, just like there was still a retinue of provo killers, that were happy to take up arms and keep the conflict inflamed. It was my job, as part of the security service, to get a peek inside their camp and find out what they were doing. Seamus was a perfect agent for this. He had grown up on the estate with most of the big men and was accommodating, under my direction, to a bit of smuggling of weapons, money, and people for the loyalists. Except he was also passing all the information to me. So far, in his year-long career as a spy, he had helped to avert more than a half a dozen potential terrorist attacks. The train station concourse was bland, to the point of being unnoticeable. Shoe repairers, a cake shop, cheap jewelry store, leather jacket clothes store, and a newsagent's. And beyond the bearers and little ticket collector were the escalators that took you down to the underground train station. I checked my watch. Seamus was late, which, to be fair, was not like him at all. Compared to some of my informants, Seamus was a veritable Swiss watch, always on time and never running slow. So this was odd. I decided to do a slow amble, and had completed one more tour of the concourse, when I saw him sitting at a table outside a cafe. Except something wasn't quite right. It was like not seeing a car coming at you until the last moment. You know it could be there in theory, but your mind tells you it isn't until it comes crashing through your front bumper. It was the same with the cafe. How could I not have noticed the cafe? But I was sure I hadn't seen it before. The place was dark-looking, in contrast to the brightly lit train concourse. The windows had those small panes They couldn't let in a lot of light, even on the brightest of days. It looked Dixonian in tone.